Hey everyone, if you've ever been to downtown Oakland's Old Oakland, you're probably wondering who the developer of Old Oakland was, and that person, his name is Steve Lowe. Well, Steve responded to my video calling for another longtime friend of mine, Oakland Mayor Libby Schaaf, to apologize to former Oakland Councilmember Wilson Riles for the harassment he received by not one but four Oakland police officers, and all because he had a question for the Oakland zoning manager, and that manager didn't want to answer it. So his way of getting rid of Wilson was to call the police, and the police overreacted. So Steve speculated that the reason why he felt the mayor didn't uh, respond to Wilson in the form of an apology was, he said, if Wilson had filed a complaint, my guess is that the city attorney will advise that no one apologize lest it might become an admission of guilt and cost the city untold thousands, which our wretched treasury just plain don't got. I like it when Barack bought a couple of beers to Professor Gates and his arresting officer, and it got all settled but like civilized folks. Yes? Well, actually, Steve, no, because I asked former Councilmember Riles if the mayor had called him to apologize, and he said no, but he did offer that Oakland Police Chief Ann Kirkpatrick called and apologized profusely. So for those of you who are still wondering what happened, or you're just, or just getting word about this by seeing this vlog, right? I will read you an excerpt from the interview that I conducted with Wilson Riles on Monday, and can be heard here at Zennie62 on YouTube. It goes like this. This is Mr. Riles responding to my question. A couple of weeks ago, someone from zoning came by indicating his house that there was a complaint about the ceremonies we were having in our backyard. It's a religious ceremony that they were doing. Then Riles goes on to say, and I quote, I don't know why he didn't have the knowledge, he being the zoning person, about the decisions of the Oakland Planning Commission would approve those ceremonies, and the council had made, but apparently he didn't. I asked him to go and check that out. Later on, I talked to him on the telephone. He said he found out that we had a right to do that, but that he was going to require me to get some permits for the temporary structures that we have in our backyard. As part of what we were doing, all of that was included in the agreement we had with the Planning Commission of the City Council. Then Mr. Riles goes on to say this. All those structures were put into the design review that we had to submit, but we also agreed that if there were anything that we were doing or that we needed to do that required a permit, that we would take our permit before doing that. But the law was very clear, and I had looked at it early in the process. The temporary structures do not require a permit. So I was a little upset that at the end of this process, after going through all this, the zoning department was still trying to shut us down for something that we had a legal right to do. And I asked them to look at the code. They refused to do that. I went down to the zoning department to meet with the inspector on Thursday morning, again, asking him to look at the code about that requirement. He refused to look at the code. I was frustrated. I was arguing with him that wasn't right, and he was supposed to be following the law. He was opposed to be doing something because someone told him to do it, or some mother complained. He was supposed to be looking at the law that he's supposed to be implementing. This is Wilson talking. He got up, went back to talk to his supervisor, he said. I said I waited for 15 minutes. He came back, sat down, and said he hadn't looked he still hadn't looked at the codes, and he wasn't going to look at the codes. So I, again, being very frustrated, you know how ridiculous it sounded. This was that he didn't bother to actually follow the law he was supposed to be implementing. He stopped talking to me, turned his head, got up, walked away, back in the activity area where they had their desk. I got up, the door is open. I didn't push the door. I didn't push him. I didn't touch anybody. I didn't threaten anybody. I walked through the door and told the folks there I wanted to talk to the supervisor. And I stayed there until the supervisor came. We walked back through the door, sat back down at the desk. I talked to the supervisor about the issues that I had and my concerns that the law wasn't being followed. And he said, I'll get back to you. So I stood up and started leaving the office and down this narrow hall, and 4 police officers came up. They were looking around trying to find somebody who was to tell them why they were there and what they were supposed to do. Apparently nobody did. And so I continued walking, and one of the officers blocked me from leaving. They didn't say we're going to arrest you. They didn't say what the charge would be or anything. They just blocked me, physically blocked me. I tried to move around the person who was blocking me, and he grabbed me, and the other officers grabbed me. So I'm pushing my arms behind my back, trying to put cuffs on me, trying to trick me and didn't distract me. And we also held down on the floor, and they were able to hustle me down to a cruiser in front of the building, you know. That's how the incident that took place Thursday morning happened. And so I asked him, I said, well, you mean to tell me that at no point did they tell you, A, why they were there, talking about the police, B, tell you what you were going to be arrested for, C, read you your Miranda rights? And Wilson says, no, none of that. On top of that, when you left the office, Wilson Riles said, no idea, none. When one call was going to be initiated by the city, when I was standing on the other side of the door, someone said, we're going to call the police. And I said, you know, you're going to call the police. You're going to call the police. I want to talk to the supervisor. Yeah, we had a supervisor come up. And so then we went back to the door. Once the supervisor came, they had indicated that they were going to call the police. So, I'm sorry, when I read this again, it just sounds as incredulous as it did the first time I heard it. Anyway, Wilson goes on to say that they were to call the police, so they did. There's just a knee-jerk thing. I'll agree to call the police. They wanted me to get out of their office with that officer. They wanted me to leave the office altogether, so here I am making a justified complaint, and their response was, we're going to call the police.